As always, I'm sitting in for Charlie McGrath of WideAwakeNews. Again, it's Gabe Elton with Austin Rare Coin and Bullion, sitting in for Charlie McGrath of WideAwakeNews on the one and only Rinse Radio Network. It is Wednesday, July 23rd, 2014, and I've got a jam-packed show for you guys. Tonight we're going to have on a guest, Eric Peters. He runs a website of the same name, ericpetersautos.com. And he does some really excellent work over there. We happen to be one of his sponsors. I wanted to take this chance to get him on the show. I think he has a lot of insight. One of the reasons is because I've followed him for quite a while, and I can tell from his writing that he's a real highly intelligent person, knows what he's talking about, and can speak on pretty much any subject. But because of a recent comment, actually, on the last radio show YouTube video that I did, I had a commenter on there who said, this sounds like an hour-long commercial. And, I took that to heart a little bit. But, thinking about this, it's almost as if maybe the show needs a disclaimer that you're listening to a gold salesperson talking about buying and selling gold. So, unfortunately, from time to time, I can understand how that might sound or feel commercial-like. Instead, though, I would like to have this looked at as a public service announcement. It's sort of like we interrupt your regularly scheduled programming in order to tell you that the dollar is becoming worth less every single day. Gold and silver have been money for thousands of years. And as this thing continues to fall apart, I think people are going to migrate back to that one standard that people have looked to as money for thousands of years, not a piece of fiat paper that gains its value just because some government said so. So I wanted to get Eric on. I think it's going to be a fun interview, and a little bit we'll talk about other things other than gold and silver. But one thing that I wanted to point out to you guys, you might want to grab a pen and paper, because unlike on the other shows, I'm going to go ahead and give out tonight's special, get it out of the way right away. Now, you have to call in order to get this special to our main number. It's 1-800-928-6468. And for the next 48 hours until Friday, we are going to offer 2014 1-ounce gold Eagles at our dealer cost. At cost. It comes out to $13.65 delivered. We also have 10th-ounce gold Eagles that we're going to offer at cost. It comes to $149 delivered to your door. You're not going to find these less anywhere. The deal ends on Friday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, so make sure to give us a call in order to get that special. Again, it's 1-ounce gold Eagle at $13.65 delivered. There is a limit of one. And we also have 1 10th-ounce gold Eagles at $149 delivered. It's a 48-hour only promo, ends on Friday. So just to give you guys some insight as to some of the things that I've seen, some things that we've talked about in past shows, is the world is continuing to move away from the dollar. Just since our last show, the BRICS Development Bank was announced, which is a major blow to the U.S. dollar's hegemony around the globe, and the fact that it remains the petrodollar, and that is the only thing, in fact, that supports the dollar. The fact that everyone is forced to use it, and the U.S. military that we have to back it up. But, it's the United States of crisis, it seems. You have the Ukraine crisis. You've got the Israeli crisis. You've got the Syrian crisis. You've got the border crisis. You've got the IRS crisis. You've got the Benghazi crisis. You have the VA hospital crisis. You have unfunded liabilities crisis. And all of these crises, they lead to banking crisis. They lead to dollar crisis. They lead to stock market crisis. We are heading there now, and we are looking at a possible World War III crisis because the propaganda is in complete and full swing. But I wanted to bring up Eric Peters. I found Eric's website about 3 to 4 years ago. Lou Rockwell often carries his work. And I used to read him on Lou Rockwell from time to time, and it's developed. EricPetersAutos.com is a website that I visit on a daily basis now. Eric is the owner, the operator, the writer, the editor, the janitor, the dog walker.
The whole ball of wax.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the whole ball of wax. Overworked and underpaid. He does a really great job over there, and he writes on all sorts of subjects from police brutality to the tyranny of the safety mafia. And Eric, I wanted to talk about one of your pet peeves, and that's Clover. Real quick, the funny thing is I've been reading your articles about Clover for quite a while, and for the longest time I thought that it was some piece of slang or nomenclature that I hadn't ran across yet. It wasn't until about 3 or 4 weeks ago that I realized that Clover was born from a commenter on your website. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes, well, I can't take credit for the naming. Several years ago, a guy began to post in response to some of my articles, and his handle was Clover. And he's relentless, and he is the antimatter opposite of someone such as myself, who believes in individual responsibility and individual accountability, and who doesn't believe in collectivism and doesn't believe in authoritarianism. And eventually, he became synonymous with collectivism, authoritarianism, utilitarianism. And so the handle kind of stuck, and it's become the means by which we identify that personality type on the website. And I'm hoping it's going to spread and catch on. The thing that's nice about it is that it's something that's family-friendly. You can talk about it in front of the kids, whereas the usual honorifics that we deploy for people of that type are not generally family-friendly.
Yeah, that's an important point, and you know it sort of goes along with everything that you point out is the tyranny of the majority and the safety mafia. You know, like backup cameras and airbags, and kind of talk about how people like Clover are the ones who push forward that sort of authoritarianism that makes you pay for these things in order for your safety, even if you never harmed anyone.
Well, let's first check the premise. You know, the premise is that the majority wants these things, or that it's a majority effort, and in fact, that's not true. In the case of these backup cameras, they originated from a tiny, minuscule handful of backup accidents. I think the figure is something on the order of 60 per year out of a nation of 300 million people. And a couple of politicians, I can't recall offhand who sponsored it, but seized this as an opportunity to grandstand for the children, as has become the common refrain, and to impose this by fiat. Now, from a market point of view, you would think if this were such a desirable feature, well, people would desire it, just as they desire, for example, four-wheel disc brakes or various other things that you don't have a mandate for, that simply people wish to buy and buy because they're available. This is something that a relative handful of people wanted, and unfortunately the automakers didn't provide it, so they sought a legislative solution to impose it on everybody else, which I think is wrong both on a moral and on an economic level.
Not only that, but the propaganda machine kicks in. An example would be like within the last year and a half to 2 years, everyone is pushing for the backup cameras and trying to get them as mandatory. And the funny thing is my father was telling me about how many, and my father happens to be a little Clover-ish on some subjects. But he happened to tell me about, all the kids that were dying because their cars weren't equipped with backup cameras. And the funniest thing is a coworker of mine her brother happens to be also a coworker of mine. He happens to be the president of the company. She went to visit her brother, and before she left, and both of them have young kids, his wife ran outside and called his sister and said, "Hey, did you know that?" And she started giving out all of these statistics about how many kids are run over because cars aren't equipped with backup cameras. And the propaganda machine just drives these guys, Clovers especially, crazy. And all they want to do is tell their story about how dangerous life is.
Well, it does, and it's selective. Here's something that many people probably are not aware of with regard to the backup camera and the backing up over children issue. This is a problem that, in a very real sense, was created by other government mandates, and specifically the bumper impact and rear crash worthiness mandates. If you look at modern car designs, you may have noticed that the back ends of modern cars are increasingly bulbous and thick and big and high. And as a result of that, the visibility to the rear is much, much more limited than it was on the cars that were built, say, in the 90s or the 80s and certainly the 70s and the 60s. In fact, it's startling if you have an opportunity to get into a car from the 70s or the 80s and compare the general visibility, both backward and to the sides, of that car relative to a modern car. So, the government imposes these standards in the name of protecting you against a rear-ender impact, but as a result of that, you also have a visibility issue, which creates a safety hazard issue.
Correct, and it's one of those unintended consequences. They solve one problem and create three, and that is how the world goes round if you're a member of the government, and the only way you make a living is from regulating and passing regulations, and also writing tickets and imposing fines. And go ahead.
Oh, everything is a cost benefit, and the question comes down to who will make the determination. Will it be you? Or will it be somebody acting in loco parentis on your behalf? An example being fuel economy versus safety. When I was in college, I had a 73 Super Beetle, and it was a great little car. It weighed about 1,600 pounds. Now, it's true. If I got hit by a semi or if I ran off the road and hit a tree, probably I'd be more likely to be injured in that car than I would in a modern compact, which weighs 1,000 pounds more. But the Beetle was incredibly efficient, and it was simple. And I elected to choose that at that time in my life when I was young and poor over, hypothetical safety. In other words, I preferred the actuality of affordability, simplicity, and high economy over the theoretical benefit of a crashworthiness that might not come into play if I don't have an accident, which is largely under my control.
That's exactly right. And you pointed out, I don't think it was the Beetle, but you pointed out another car back in the 70s that had such extremely extremely efficient gas mileage and beats most of the cars that are built today. And what car was that?
Oh, well, actually, it wasn't just one car. It's startling. There's a website that actually posts this if you want to refer to it. I think it's Fuel Economy. It's not the government site. Oh, gosh, I can't remember the URL. But at any rate, there were a number of cars that were built in the late 70s and the early 80s, including the infamous and famous Chrysler K cars that were all getting around 40 miles per gallon or even better. There was the Honda CRX. There was the Renault Le Car, Plymouth Champ. There were a number of cars of that era that were getting 40 miles per gallon or better. And what's really interesting about that is it's 30 years ago, and the majority of those cars did not have electronic fuel injection. They did not have overdrive transmissions. They didn't have low rolling resistance tires and all the aerodynamic aids. And today, cars with all those advantages are only just barely equaling the gas mileage that those cars of 30 years ago were delivering. And the reason is that they were light. And because they were light, they could get by with 70 horsepower engines instead of 130 horsepower engines.
But today's cars have the backup cameras, they've got the airbags, they've got everything else. So you might be able to get a a car that's very economical fuel-wise, but it's not economical on the pocketbook. And explain how the manufacturers love the regulators mandating things like backup cameras and airbags.
Sure, because they become profit centers. Back in the 70s, when airbags were first introduced, they were optional. And they were very, very expensive at that time. I think they were comparable in cost to buying air conditioning, which in the early 70s was a big, high-dollar item. Not surprisingly, not many people bought them. And the manufacturers resisted initially the mandate that the government was pushing. And at that time, it was Joan Claybrook, who was the Führeress of NHTSA. They succeeded in doing that, and I guess their actuaries and accountants looked at it and thought, you know what? If you can't beat them, join them. These things can be big profit centers for us. They may cost us something on the front end, but we can pass the majority of that on to consumers. That's the first point. But the key point is they make up a ton of money on the back end, on repair and maintenance costs, and also because vehicles are thrown away prematurely, long before their drivetrains are no longer viable as a result of all of this equipment, and in particular the electronics that support it. So, in effect, they're forcing people into buying new cars more frequently than they might have had to in the past.
That's right. And when it breaks, they often can't afford to replace it.
No, certainly not. The typical replacement cost, let's say you get into an accident with a car that has just the two airbags, the steering wheel airbag and the passenger front airbag, and those both deploy. The typical cost to repair that is about $2,000 to $2,500. Now, let's say that your vehicle has a retail value of about $8,000. You have to start with a $2,000 figure before you begin to add the cost of the body damage and so on. And most insurance companies will total a car, that is, just write it off and throw it away, once the estimated cost to repair exceeds 50% of the car's current market value in repaired condition. So, with $2,000 worth of airbag damage, not counting the body damage, it's very, very easy to reach that threshold with a car that's, say, 7 or 8 years old or older.
Correct. And you mentioned that 8,000 number, and it rang a bell for me. You had written once before about a pickup truck that you had bought maybe in the 80s or so, and I think you paid $8,000 for it. And now, after all the taxes and registration fees, you've almost got exactly the same amount to the pickup?
Well, yeah, actually, I have 2 Nissan pickup trucks. One's a 98, one's a 2002. And I got a bee in my bonnet one day and just did a little rough math. And the 98 I bought in 2003 for about $7,000. And I calculated how much I've been compelled to pay in insurance. And in Virginia, we have something called the personal property tax on vehicles. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
We do registration. It's almost just as bad. Vehicle registration.
We have that, too. In addition to that, what they do, that they dun you for a percentage based on their calculation of the vehicle's retail value. And even for a vehicle as old as my truck, I still get hit up for something like $150 annually every year for the privilege of owning, quote-unquote, my truck. Then there's the insurance, then there's the registration, then there's the state inspection, emissions, and all the other folderol that they compel you to pay for. And lo and behold, I figured out that I'm spending as much on all that stuff as I spent just to buy the truck. But I count myself lucky because if I had bought something more expensive, something newer, let's say I bought a $30,000 SUV, which is these days, not by any means a big deal, I could be looking forward to paying probably around $800 a year just to the property tax for the next 5 years until the vehicle depreciates and the book value drops a little bit.
Yeah, that's what it all boils down to is the initiation of force and compelling you to do certain things to own property that's supposedly yours in the first place. And that goes back to something that you write about often, especially when talking about clovers, is if there's no victim, there's no crime. And maybe you can expand on that sort of philosophy.
Well, the one I like to harp on is a very good example are these mandatory seatbelt laws. It's possible that I might be increasing my own personal risk exposure by driving my car without a seatbelt, but I can see no way that I present a risk of harm to any other person by not wearing my seatbelt. Therefore, I don't believe it's the government's business or anybody's business, except maybe my wife's or my mom's business, whether I wear my seatbelt. Yet these laws are now on the books that, in effect, turn us into little children, and the state's costumed enforcers are our parents, and they don't just hit us with a stick, they threaten us with a gun over these things. And it's gone from the obnoxious to the absurd. You've got these seatbelt things in most states, and then you have Bloomberg up in New York telling people how large a soda they can buy or sell. And in other cases, they're telling people that they can or cannot smoke in their own private residence. And this sort of thing inevitably is going to progress and expand. It has to, because the principle justifies limitless intervention in your personal choices in your personal life.
That's right. It's an endless circle that comes back around all the time. So we're about to be heading to break here in a minute or so. And whenever I come back, I've got a couple of articles. We have 2 breaks, by the way, Eric. One shortly, and then there'll be a short segment, and then another break, and then we'll bring home the rest of the program all the way to the end. But I've got 2 articles I wanted to go over, and they're about the economy, but it also has a lot to do with what you talk about, and one in particular is featured on Zero Hedge today. It's called "The Gates Are Closing. SEC Votes Through Money Market Reform." And basically, I'll give you the details and the listeners the details after the break, but it comes down to who really owns it. If someone can tell you that you don't have access to your money in your money market account, whose money is it? If someone can charge you in order to drive your truck that you personally had bought years before, then who really owns the truck? It goes back to the age-old argument: is quit paying your property taxes and see who owns the property.
Right.
Right. And this is pervasive throughout society. And you are just taking on one aspect of it that you understand extremely well, but it goes to the gold market, it goes to the silver market, it goes to the SEC and the money market accounts. People always talk about the possibility of a gold confiscation or the government taking your gold, and I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow or next year, but as things get desperate, I think the government's going to come after anything that's not nailed down. And
we have the precedent for it.
That's right, and that's right. It's a never-ending circle. And so, I'll go over that article. But one thing I want to remind the readers about also is the special that I mentioned earlier. We have the 1 ounce gold Eagles at dealer cost, $13.65 delivered, and the 10th ounce gold Eagles delivered to your door for $149 a piece. So going into the break, Eric, and I'm bad about timing up, I'm looking at a computer that says 7:24, and I'm looking at a cell phone that says 7:27, so I'm not exactly sure.
Like the clocks in my house. I'm old school. I don't even have digital stuff around here.
That's smart. So tell us a little bit about your history. Didn't you used to write? Oh, I hear the music. So let's talk about it when we get back, Eric. All right, it's Gabe Elton with the Austin Report, sitting in for Charlie McGrath of Wide Awake News on the one and only Rinse Radio Network. We've got Eric Peters here sitting in the wings, and with EricPetersAutos.com. So I'm going to go over this article, Eric, that we mentioned before the break, and kind of get your take on it. So basically, the SEC voted today about imposing what they call gates on money market accounts. And basically what they're saying is that in times of crisis, that the fund that runs your money market account can lower redemption gates and fees in times of market stress. So as the article goes on Zero Hedge entitled, "The Gates Are Closing, SEC Votes Through Money Market Reform." And it starts by saying, it was nearly 5 years ago when Zero Hedge first wrote, "This is the government. Your legal right to redeem your money market account has been denied," in which we predicted, as part of the ongoing herding of investors away from other asset classes and into stocks, regulation will be implemented to enforce that money market fund managers will have the option to suspend redemptions to allow for the orderly liquidation of fund assets, or in other words, implementation of redemption gates. And Zero Hedge goes on to say that they believe the logic is to spook the participants. You know, there's $2.6 trillion sitting in money markets right now.
Yeah.
And the government wants any piece of that. You know, I've always said is going back to, confiscation of gold or potential confiscation of gold, I've always said is we're going to have fair warning. They're going to come for the money markets and also the IRA money first. It's like the government has done everything they can through these quantitative easing programs. They don't have a tool left in the toolbox, and it's like a cat looking up at a bird cage with all the money sitting there in these IRAs and money markets. It's a huge amount of money that they want. And so basically what they have just put in new rules that will cap the amount of money that one could redeem from their own money market account. Now, the vote was 3-2 on the SEC, and one of the dissenting votes came out and actually really scorched them. She said that it's the wrong tool to address risk. She said that she fears these incentives will result in a greater chance of fire sales in times of stress and spread panic to other parts of the financial system while denying investors and issuers access to capital. She says in the event the gate imposed increases, investors have a strong incentive to redeem ahead of others. It can be very damaging to the financial system as a whole, and it will have impact on wholesale funding markets. Or let's see. When the gate for a fund is used, it doesn't mean the impact on wholesale funding markets will be prevented. And so it sort of goes along with why would people be putting this in place if they didn't see a collapse at hand, and whose property is it, Eric?
Right. Well, my immediate reaction to that is, why is such a thing even up for a vote? Nominally, if this is your asset, your account, your money, who are these people issuing what amount of fatwas, decreeing how much you can withdraw, when you can use or transfer or in any way use your own money, allegedly your money? Control is ownership. If you don't control your account, if you don't control your money, it's not really yours, and it's extremely scary.
And that brings me to something that we deal with all the time here is, we help folks who have money tied up in an IRA buy physical gold and physical silver. But when you have a self-directed IRA that you want to include gold and silver in, you do not take ownership. You do not take delivery. It is sent to Delaware to a third-party holding company. And, I tell people it's the last best option. I mean, if that's the only thing you can do, and if you, a lot of people obviously don't want to close out their IRAs and get their cash out so that they can buy physical and take delivery. But there goes your ownership. You can have a box that they tell you has your name on it, but when push comes to shove, is it really there?
That's right. It's about as sound as Fed funny money. And with regard to the tax penalties associated with clearing out your 401k or mutual fund, the line that I've heard, I can't take credit for it, but I like it a lot, is that 50% of 100% is better than 100% of nothing.
That's a great point. And another thing is, whenever you go into an IRA, you're allowing the government to tax you at a future tax rate. Now, I'm
Correct.
never going to say that we have a low taxation and, it's perfect out there, but who knows what it's going to be like in the future. And it may be much worse than it is currently. And another thing is I wanted to pass by you because it's often, not really bothered me, but I think about it quite often is, you have all these people who love regulation, who love authority and the use of force, and who want to impose their ideals on other people. And they put in the rest of the country, and I shouldn't say the rest, but people who fall into that line of thinking, put so much faith into these regulators in order for them to tell us what's coming down the road. Why is it that those people who defy regulators and who can't stand the idea of force and government bureaucracy, people like Ron Paul, how come they are the ones who warn of the financial crisis before it ever gets here? Long before the regulators ever knew what was coming, people like Ron Paul was warning folks back in 2006, 2007, and actually for 30 years before that.
Well, my interpretation is that A, they're decent people, and B, they understand human nature better than the other side. The other side thinks that there are special people who are regulators or government bureaucrats or politicians, and by dint of being regulators or politicians or bureaucrats, somehow they're endowed with superior wisdom, superior judgment, and they're more ethical and honest than the average person, which is preposterous when you stop and think about it. They're subject to the same foibles as you or I or any other person, which is why it's so important not to invest these people with power over us.
That's a great point, and it just goes on, and it's sort of like the tyranny of the safety mafia. When you talk about backup cameras and all of this, is that they're not working for the consumer, folks. And I think that it's time that everybody realize they're working on behalf of big business. It's sort of like how the USDA was fighting against labeling genetically modified food. Or, these guys are we founded the Department of Energy to reduce our reliance on foreign oil. And then after tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, in 30 years, our reliance on foreign oil is higher than ever. Explain how, the whole bureaucracy is set up to serve corporate interests.
Well, I'll be a little bit more generous. I would categorize it two ways. I think there are people such as you've described, but then I think there are also people who are simply ignoramuses and dupes. They have no, for example, engineering knowledge. They will cry, well, why? We should have 50 mile per gallon cars. Obama, for example, is probably a guy who couldn't change his own oil, and he thinks that he can wave his magic wand, and the engineers can just, hey, presto, create a 50 mile per gallon car that doesn't entail any other compromises. And as anybody with any mechanical knowledge or engineering knowledge will tell you, these things sometimes have conflicting. If you want a car that's safe, you can have a car that's safe. If you're going to have a car that's heavy, you can have a car that performs well, or you can have a car that gets good gas mileage. There are compromises with everything, and it irritates me to no end to have these people who are in no position, ethically or practically, to be issuing these dictates to people just to pronounce that you shall have this or you shall not have that. And I'm hoping that people are eventually going to get tired of it, wake up to it, and demand that things change.
Well, yes, and whenever you say people, there's plenty of clovers and the people out there that will support this, but I'm talking about the actual regulatory bodies at the top, over and over and over again, seem to be protecting their corporate interests, and it's a revolving door from regulators.
Yeah, well, it's a very good example with regard to the car industry. They now favor these crash tests. Is it break time?
Yeah, we're getting close, and I'll have another article. I'm going to let you close up on that. I have another article when we get back from the break, and also want to learn a little bit about your history. Going into the commercial, see you on the backside. Elton here with Austin Rare Coin and Bullion, and bringing you the Austin Report, sitting in for Charlie McGrath on the one and only Rents Radio Network. We have our guest Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com, and we left into the commercial, Eric, talking about how
rent seeking.
What's that?
Rent seeking.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, the example that I wanted to give, the major automakers can afford to crash test literally scores of brand new vehicles in the process of complying with crash, federal crash standards. If you or I wanted to found a small car company, let's say, build a better mousetrap, financially it's a virtual impossibility for a small startup company to do that, to destroy 100 cars in order to satisfy to the federal government's satisfaction that your vehicle complies with its standards. So naturally, General Motors, Ford, all the big boys, they've come to embrace their partnership with big government because it leads to big profits for them. And of course, we've got the example of the massive bailouts that came at taxpayers' expense a few years ago, as another case in point.
That's right, and you mentioned the car manufacturers, but the same can be said for Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and the rest of those cats. So,
sure.
Kind of tie the ends to our conversation about regulators. I have an article from here that people that run in the precious metal circles have known for quite a while, and it's pretty much common knowledge. But now, since it's been printed in Forbes, well, then it must be true. And basically, this Forbes article is a reprint of a Kitco article that says research demonstrates price suppression during silver fixing. And so this guy named Andrew Kaminsky, he's a researcher at the University of Western Australia. He analyzed 14 years of silver market data and said his research shows that the fix, they're talking about the silver price fix, creates statistically lower prices. He found that a 10 to 12 basis point downward bias in the intraday price of silver right around the time of the fixing. This represents 3 times the average daily return on silver over the same period, Kaminsky wrote in his paper, as one of his 5 key findings. In fact, he says people who use the benchmark price, which is the price fixing price, are trading at the lowest price of the day. And this is 14 years worth of data. But the question is, why does Andrew Kaminsky have to tell people that? How come the regulators aren't figuring that out? How come the common silver investor knows that? Andrew Kaminsky knows that. But the CME or COMEX or regulators over at the CFTC turn a blind eye. And he goes on to say, strong empirical evidence that price behavior of the fixing is significantly different to that of open markets instruments, spot and silver futures trading at the same time. So, and it goes on, but, we've known this for years, Eric. I say we, talking about us in the industry. Ron Paul knew that a financial crisis was coming years before the regulators. What's going on?
Well, I'll go back a moment and question whether these regulators don't in fact know it. I suspect that they do, but I think that it's not in their interest to speak about it openly.
That's
their
exactly
interest
right.
is in perpetuating this monopoly scam system, which profits them.
That's an excellent point. So I'll tell you a little bit, and Eric, you already know this, but I'm talking to the listeners, is tell you guys a little bit about how I found Eric and how important it is to visit his website and support him over there. Eric's website had been delisted from Google several maybe 8 months ago or so. And I never comment on any websites. In fact, I joined my first forum not so long ago, and I'm not so much unlike Eric. I had to have my arm twisted just to put Skype on my computer. I've never had a Facebook account. And the reason why I say that is to say this. I was reading an article of Eric's about how Google was totally screwing up his business model over there, and he was going to have to start asking for donations soon. And I looked, and I was like, there's nobody that advertises on Eric's site. And for the first time I've ever commented on your site, by the way, Eric, I was like, why don't you accept advertisers? And Eric's like, well,
yeah, you got the ball rolling.
Yeah, why don't you send me an email and we'll start to talk. And just explain a little bit about where you're from, your past, and your past work before EricPetersAutos.com, and where you are now with the Google episode. And as I pointed out before, I really think that your website does a great service, and all of our listeners should be supporting alternative media. So with that, why don't you tell the story real quick?
Okay, well, I really appreciate all of that. And just in the way of background, I kind of have had feet in both the mainstream media and, of course, now in the independent media. I began my career, like a lot of guys, just working for regular papers, and I did a stint at the Washington Times where I was a columnist and an editorial writer. And over the years, I've written for the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News, Chicago Tribune. For a while, I was the cars columnist for AOL and Netscape. And then I have to give credit where credit is due. A buddy of mine suggested that I go ahead and launch my own website, and I got to thinking about it and thought, that's not a half-bad idea. I would have complete editorial freedom, which is the upside of running your own website. The downside, of course, is that it's all on me. I don't have a copy editor. I don't have a headline writer. I don't have a graphics person. I get to do everything myself, so it really is almost a 24/7 thing. I shouldn't say completely 24/7, but I do spend a lot of time on it. So it's a blessing, and it's a burden at the same time. But I'm enjoying it. It's gratifying to be able to speak and write my mind, and in my own small way, I hope perhaps to be part of this movement to change what I think is a corrupt and unhealthy system.
Good point. And just to back that up a little bit, Eric, I really enjoy your writing, and I can't believe that you write so flawlessly without someone else looking at your work. And the reason why I can say that is I write a lot for our company, and there are always mistakes, and the editors normally catch about 80% of them, and then normally it goes on and gets posted or emailed out, and there's something wrong with the article. And I read your stuff a lot, and it is written very well. I love your style of writing, and I also think that you do a really good job of editing, because I couldn't do anything close to yours. It's normally
I try, but stuff still gets through. It's amazing. I'll edit it in one format. We use the WordPress platform before it goes live, and I'll think it's absolutely clean, flawless. There aren't any typos, and then I'll reread it on the live site, and sure enough, there's a typo, and it's frustrating to me because I am a perfectionist about stuff like that.
And another thing I've noticed about your site is you have some very, for lack of a better word, just people that follow you religiously. And you have a lot of commenters on your site. There's always an active conversation going on your website. So I think you've got a good core of people there. And that's the one, I had to fight a little bit on my end, because people say, and still today, why do we want to advertise on a website that has car reviews? And the reason is because of your guests, or because of your visitors rather, and how active they are in the comment section. Just the one article that I commented on regarding the Google delisting, it was had something like over 200 comments there. So, and you're getting a lot of play. You're getting posted at other places, and that's the thing that I look for in someone that I want to advertise with is what kind of guests do they have and visitors visiting the site, and how many other places is their work posted. And I also want to give out a shout out to LouRockwell.com, because if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have found you, and I'm so certain that I did.
I'll second that. I'd also like to put in a plug for the people who do come and post on my site. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the caliber and the quality of the people that we've got posting. I've come to know a lot of these people, and I'm constantly awed by the depth and breadth of their knowledge, their eloquence. If you go and read the comments, you'll find the comments, I think, are often as good or better than my own articles, certainly. And I think that's one of the things that is unique and special about EP Autos. If I can toot my own little horn a little bit, and it's not my horn, it's their horn.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's what makes Eric Peters Autos so successful, along with your great work over there. And like I said, it's a real good pleasure to have you on the show. And I wanted to do a show something other than pitching gold for an hour, And I think Eric brings in some insight. And I'd love to have you back on the show at some point in the future.
Sure, let's do it.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. And we will be talking soon. I'm sure we'll email back and forth. And guys, if you want to visit ericpetersautos.com, you will see our banner ad there. You can click directly through to our latest promotion on his site, which is Silver Eagles at rock bottom pricing. Or you can call our main line, 1-800-928-6468, and get the special that I mentioned tonight, which is 1 1-ounce gold eagle or 1 10th-ounce gold eagle at dealer cost. So, Eric, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be in touch. I'd love to have you on in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Talk soon.
Yes, sir. Have a good evening.
You too. Okay, bye-bye.